Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about worst case scenario. I see so much more now in the OCD community talk about accepting worst case scenario. And I'm pretty confident that comes down to a lot of the work we've done over the last decade of raising awareness around this subject. Because when I started out working with OCD, I used to talk about making peace with the worst case scenario, unconditional self-acceptance, life acceptance, and other acceptance constantly. And there always used to be, when I first started, lots of misunderstandings around OCD, where people wouldn't understand how important that is. And there used to be that sort of common narrative of thoughts are thoughts, leave thoughts there to just pass like clouds through your mind, and don't pay any attention to them. Just imagine it like a radio station, tune out of that radio station you don't listen to. Now, that obviously, if you follow this account, definitely doesn't work in the majority of OCD cases. It's an important part of the OCD recovery journey, but by no means all at all. So worst case scenario is incredibly liberating. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, people who then think of really scary things like, how can I accept that? Well, that's going to take a while to get to. And remember, acceptance isn't agreement. That doesn't mean you like the act. It means that you could still see that the human being has value, is fallible, had genetics leading up to the decision, had an environment in their childhood that led to those behaviours, so loads of things contributing to the way they acted in the cases of harm OCD and so on. And you don't need to get to a place of complete and utter acceptance. You just need to become better at accepting in general, so it sort of lubricates the cogs where OCD is all locked up, right? Now, when I started in this journey talking all about accepting worst case scenario, you didn't used to see it that much. It was, of course, common in the nature of rational, in the basis of REBT, rational thinking and stoicism. But still today, it's hugely misunderstood with that thoughts are thoughts quote constantly bombarded through the OCD community all the time, even though most people are putting their hand up and saying, hey, I'm still stuck, I'm still chronically guilty and chronically anxious, this isn't working for me. And people are saying, oh, well, because you haven't distanced yourself enough from the thoughts yet. And it's like, no, I'm tightly fused to it and it's not releasing. So it's great to see now that talk of the worst case scenario is much more common. It's great to see that, because that's something that I knew needed to change, to bring OCD out the dark and put it on the map. The most important thing for OCD awareness right now is focusing on getting people to understand that they need a deeper level of acceptance, usually for chronic OCD long term, okay? That is a fact. We know that's a fact because otherwise OCD forums would be empty, and they're not. They are busy, because there is still something that they're scared of, chronically attached to, and they can't create that. They're too latched to it, it's too fused. So that takes time to practice for that to release. And the problem here is that, of course, when you're further along the path, you're able to distance and see thoughts of thoughts more and be less fused to it. But if you've got something you've been chronically latched to, say with a false memory, real event type OCD stuff, or you've got a situation where you're going through a difficult real life event, like perhaps like Alexander's video you just saw the other day, where he's in a war zone in Ukraine. He was saying over and over, you can't just say thoughts are thoughts. And people were sort of patronizing, saying to him in forums like, hey, it's just a thought. He's like, no, it isn't a thought. I'm in a bloody war zone. It's definitely not a thought. So you've got to learn to accept these worst case scenarios. You've got to learn to be at peace with these things. That's where we get free. If you had cancer, the way you would get rid of the chronic anxiety is by making peace with accepting your situation of having cancer. It wouldn't be by saying, oh, it's just a thought of cancer. No, because they've got cancer. So that's so key. And it was so difficult along my journey to raising this awareness, and still today is, because what would happen is people would constantly misinterpret that. And because the OCD is the doubting disorder, they would constantly doubt how they were doing it. And so they would be like, okay, thoughts are thoughts sounds nice and easy. It sounds comfortable. I see that written most of the time. I must be doing it wrong. I'll just carry on down that path of thoughts are thoughts for years, even though they're not improving, because they believe, oh, I think that must work. But if you haven't improved in 3, 4, 5 years, something is definitely not working. So you've got to be clear about that, right? And of course, it's going to be difficult. Recovery is not easy. If it was easy, like I said, the forums would be empty. So it's obviously difficult. Accepting worst case scenario is obviously against what you want. It's obviously difficult. So it's obviously a situation whereby you're finding it very difficult to accept those things, okay? And you'll find, like say if you've got a fear of HIV, you're terrified of HIV, your brain is not just going to digest that and be completely at peace and accept that with a situation whereby you're completely over your fear and calm. It's like putting your hand in a tank with a tarantula if you're scared of spiders and just going, just accept, just accept, just accept as you put your hand in there. Trust me, you're going to be bloody terrified until you change your perspective of spiders, right? And build up with exposures and so on, or without exposures in that case, of course, or not always needed in most OCD situations, but changing your perspectives and beliefs around that scary thing. So it is incredible to see now that the worst case scenario is becoming more and more important, but it's still got a long way to go in awareness because people are only doing it so far. They're like, okay, well, I can accept that in a worst case scenario, but definitely not that thing. The reason is because they don't understand how to help someone learn to accept that other thing because it's more difficult. The same as like somebody who has cancer. If you said the average person accepting cancer, they'd say, oh, everyone would be scared of that. That'd be very hard to accept. But what happens if someone's got it? What if they've got to live with it for 5-10 years? We've got to get in there and change their perspective of it so they can be calm. Otherwise, they're going to be chronically anxious. Now, I've worked with many people with serious illnesses, terminal illnesses over the years, and it is perspective shifts that they come about themselves, that they start to appreciate life more. They start to appreciate how short life is. They start to see that all human lives are short, but they just know when their life's coming more to an end. And when you speak to them and you see it, I remember speaking to a woman, she had stage 4 esophageal cancer, and she'd only had it for about a month. And I remember her saying to me, she said, you know, Rob, this is the worst thing that's happened to me and the best. And I said, how do you mean the best? It was 20 years ago, this. And I said, how do you mean the best? She said, because this has woken me up to life. I was living at a surface level. That was very much like me with OCD recovery. I was living at a surface level until I had to change all my perspectives to change and get under with a deeper level of acceptance to recover from OCD. So that's so key. There's a gift in anything. There's a gift in anything, but people don't realize, even if you're in jail, there's a gift in that you're learning to have a perspective of jail and being without lots of things that we're used to and adapting and changing in those difficult circumstances. There's a gift in disease. There's a gift in losing your money. There's a gift in injury. There's a gift in all these things if we look for it. And people think, now, how can you call that a gift? But you can when you can see that, when you can see that you wouldn't have got that meaning and that experience from that event until you'd been pushed into it. Just like Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. It was a huge did so much work preventing suicide by helping people to see there is a meaning in the obstacles. There is a meaning in those really difficult life circumstances. And that is so key. And that was so key to me with OCD when I'd been stuck for years and years and years and then suddenly started recovering and thought, fucking hell, I have lost so many years of my life to OCD. And then I felt the worst I had felt for a long time because at that point I couldn't see the meaning that this hard journey had changed my had changed my perspectives and empowered my life. In that moment, I felt the worst I'd felt. I felt the absolute worst. Because in that moment, I thought, I've done this to me. I've wasted all this time. This has all been my mistakes. This has all been my fault. And that kept me so stuck because I was coming down on myself hard and not looking for what the gift was from that experience. That's so key. When people come to me all the time and say, I'm hopeless, Rob, all these reasons. You've got to look for the reasons there's hope there. You've got to look for reasons why suffering doesn't mean life over. Suffering means things in there that's going to empower and change your life, even in those obstacles. And even if you're terminally ill, there is a thing there that you're going to see life from a perspective that other humans are missing and not seeing. And so you can appreciate that moment in a completely different way. In everything, we have the opportunity to change our perspective. It's not the event, it's our perspective of that event. So I wanted to come on here. I wanted to talk about that and worst case scenario unconditional self-life acceptance and looking for the meaning in that adversity, and how great it is to see that now online being shared more, and more people realizing thoughts are thoughts is a very light approach. It's a key part of recovery, not fighting thoughts, not battling thoughts, not doing that, but it's not all there is to recovery. And it's so important that that's raised through OCD awareness, because that's the reason why so many people are stuck.